Well, today I'm going to try to turn this piece of worktop material, which is a resin from sample from Formica. I think I'm going to sandwich this between two bits of this, I think it's Venga, offcut of a worktop. Okay, so I've just used some tight bond polyurethane glue, and it's now clamped up. So I'm now going to turn it to cylinder, and then hopefully I've got a load of offcuts of pen blanks. So I'm going to cut the offcuts up, and I'm going to stack them all around the top, and then I'm going to cast some epoxy resin over the top of it, and then turn out a little bowl. So I'm going to turn a tenon so that it will fit on the Axminster O'Donnell dovetail.
Both the wood and the sample of resin worktop are extremely hard, so I have to keep changing tools, trying to find the one that's really going to cut the best. And then after I've got the cylinder sorted out, just trim up both ends with a parting tool, and then put a tenon on to suit the O'Donnell jaws. And then before I put it in the O'Donnells, I'll just do some basic shaping. That resin is so hard, I resort to using the carbide with the pointed tip to dress it up, because everything else is just not touching it. A last little bit of shaping at the bottom with a scraper, and then into the O'Donnells to carry on with the profiling. Slowly making some progress, but both the wood and the resin are incredibly hard. So it's back to the pointed carbide to make some more progress. Well, that finally got the shape I'm looking for, so a bit of work with the scraper and then on with some sanding. Swiftly followed by a polish up with some Yorkshire grit. That brought it up really nice, and the dark resin slice together with the dark wood really started to work together.
Okay, so I've got these lots of little offcuts. I've got to figure out how to mount them. I know I'll just polish the outside, but that'll have to be done again, I think, because I've got to return this. If I glue this flush with the outside and then resin it up, you'll see it on the outside. Different colours. And we'll also see it on the inside in some shape or form. It's an experiment, who knows?
Right, so I just marked up the size of the offcuts, and I want to make sure that there's a bit of the resin actually goes between the offcut and the outside. So that's where I've marked it. I'm now going to cut a rebate into the bowl where the offcuts will be glued so that they don't float when the epoxy is poured on.
Okay, I've got to make a mould for the outside, and I haven't got any material, so whoops. So I've measured the outside, about 95 mil, and I'm going to have to turn myself a mould.
So just true up the piece of scrap, which I think is a piece of sycamore. Now put a tenon on it and mount it in the chuck jaws so that I can then mark up the size of the bowl and turn basically a donut that I'm going to then somehow glue to the outside of the bowl to stop the resin leaking out. But at least that's the hope. So I've cut the pieces of pen blank into something like similar sort of sizes for each of the different colours, spaced them evenly around the outside and then super glued each one into the recess. I've also made a recess in the middle that's the size of the top of a pump action toothpaste, which will act as a former for the inside so that I can economise on some of the resin. Now this is the first epoxy resin pour that I've done, so I decided, I think in hindsight mistakenly, to use a hot melt glue to create a seal between the donut and the body of the bowl. It's quite a good fit, so I thought that should be okay. I think it would have been in hindsight better to have used a silicone, something that was more goopy and sticky to get a really good seal. I thought I'd apply a debonding layer between the mould and the epoxy. I don't think it was necessary, I don't think it really worked, so I've just stuck some food safe mineral oil on because that's what I've got handy, just to coat it to seal it off a bit. The resin I'm using is resin for art. It's an odourless epoxy resin. It doesn't need a vacuum or pressure chamber because the bubbles come to the surface because it's so thin. It suggests that you should only pour about 10 millimeters of thickness in this one, so otherwise it gets too hot. It at general room temperature takes about 12 hours to set. I think it gels up much more quickly than that and starts to stiffen. But if you heat it up to sort of 40 degrees or so, which I haven't done, but it will set in about 3 hours. I think you can even bake it at 100 degrees and it will go off in about 40 minutes. So I'm just going to use some Pearl X mica powders to give it a little bit of colour. Just a small proportion of a salt spoon, don't need very much. And then I want to give it a little bit of a sparkle, so I'm putting in some of the gold Pearl X as well, just to sort of lift it a little. So though I've mixed it well, I wanted to try and keep some sort of swirly pattern, if I possibly could, in the resin. So as you can see, it's sort of creating a bit of a swirly effect. So time to pour it in. This is where things start to go wrong a bit. Fortunately, I had got 2 layers of container because I thought it might just leak. Well, it did leak, and it started to go everywhere. So there was quite a bit of frantic mopping up and then also using the hot melt glue gun to sort of do an additional seal on the outside, which was sort of effective-ish, although not that effective because of course the resin was slowly running out as well. And after I put that on, I then cling wrapped the thing. That stopped most of the leakage, so I now use the heat gun just to across the surface to bring any bubbles to the surface, and then use like a dental pick to prick any of the obvious bubbles that came to the surface. Just kept an eye on it for the next 5 minutes or so doing that. So I left it overnight and came back, removed the cling film and some of the hot melt glue from the outside. It was a right old mess, but it was under control. It hadn't really gone anywhere. And at this point, I was then ready for a second pour.
Right, so I've mixed 50 grams of the base and 25 grams of the hardener. I'm just going to put some, just going to put a bit of gold powder in this one. Not much. Also a bit of methyl with brass powder. It's got some nice sort of swirly effects. Probably loads of air bubbles because I don't know what I'm doing. Right, let's go and pour that in. Logically, if this had leaked last night, the resin should have filled the gaps in the bottom, so it shouldn't leak again.
And then the same treatment as before, the hot air gun, and prick any bubbles that come to the surface, watching it for the first 5 or 10 minutes, just to make sure that you get any out that you can.
Okay then, so here we are. It made a right mess when it was leaking out the side. So all of the nice shining up of the other stuff has all gone to pot, and I've still got the plastic inside. So let's see what happens. I think I'm going to turn this off. I don't think there's any other easy way of getting it off. Not such a good idea.
So just using a bowl gouge, very quickly remove the mould until it had gone completely, and you start to get to see the resin. So freshly sharpened tools, and then just went back, cleaned up all the mess on the previously beautifully sanded and sealed finish, of course, and then got into shaping and refining the bowl, making sure that I'm cutting out any of the air bubbles if possible and inconsistencies as a result of the casting. There's about 1mm or so of resin on the outside of the pieces of pen blank that need to be turned away. So after I'd got some of the material off with traditional tools, I've then gone and used the square carbide to actually hog the material out, much more efficient on this very hard resin and also extremely hard wood. So the pen blanks start to reveal themselves, starting to look quite effective. Just need to carry on going until the pen blanks can be seen clearly with the resin around the outside. So that's starting to come together. At this point I've still got my toothpaste tube in the top, so I'm just going to part that off and then start to think about actually cleaning out the centre. So it seemed like a good idea to get the Forstner out and just clean out the centre, ready for a bit of hollowing. I did check the depth a few times because I wanted to make sure that the bottom did reveal some of the dark insert of that piece of worktop, but I didn't want to go right through the bottom into the lowest level of the wood. So now just using the cut carbides on the action of the probe system to hollow it out. It's a long slow job though, because there's a fair bit of resin to take out. Also use the pointed scraper carbide, flat top carbide, to get some of that material out, and also another round flat topped carbide scraper as well. It took a bit of time, so fast forward to the end result. So after I'd finished hollowing the inside, just a bit more finessing of the final shape on the outside with the square carbide, and then it's ready for sanding. As I was sanding, I could see that there was a slight inconsistency at the interface between the layers, so I just decided to address that and create some little V-grooves at the interfaces just to mask that slight differences between the materials. And then sanding inside and out with the arbor system all the way up to 600 grit. And then a good dollop of Yorkshire grit on both sides to bring the colour up. And then, although that was giving a good finish, I really wanted to get that epoxy resin to pop. So I carried on from 600 grit done with the rotary using the pen turning micro web stuff all the way up to the 12,000 grit done on a wet and dry basis. And then after that, some burnishing cream just to finish it off. It's beginning to look good now. I decided to put some friction polish on as the overall coating finish. Not sure that was the best thing to do, but it came up nicely. So after I buffed all that up, I could still see that it wasn't quite as shiny as I'd like it. So finished it off with some Hampshire Sheen High Gloss, and that really started to make it pop. I think the resins are quite effective, and with a strong light you can actually see through them, so the translucent effect was achieved. With that done, I carefully parted it off so that it got a slightly concave bottom, and then finished the bottom off the lathe with hand sanding and the electric drill arbor system, and there we have it. I'm really pleased with this as my first go at a proper resin pour. I think that was very successful.